Good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing on day 2? Oh, one more time. Yeah, okay. I know. It's been a minute. We maybe didn't get a lot of sleep last night after the Gaylord.
Who's heard AI more than 100 times? Okay. More than 20 times? I feel like everyone has to have their hands up at this point.
Absolutely. Awesome. So welcome. This is From Principles to Practice, Ethical and Effective AI Adoption for Your Law Firms. First, before we kick off, I do want to give a thank you to our visionary partners, Case Status, Noda, Lawmatics, Briefpoint, InfoTrack, and Gavel. If you haven't had a chance, please pop by the exhibitor hall and chat with these wonderful folks. I'm Erin Walker. I'm the Director of Marketing Strategy and Enablement here at Clio. This is my 7th ClioCon. This is my first ClioCon in person. So I'm so excited to be here with you today. And part of my role at Clio is to help enable the marketing organization with the tools and the processes that they need to accomplish their jobs. And boy, we've been talking a lot about AI. And I'm joined on stage by Amelie.
Hi, all. My name is Amelie Bobrovsky. I'm the founder and CEO at Formally. We're a legal AI company focused on being the connective tissue between your law firm and your clients. So injecting some delight into the user experience there. I also have a background in ethical AI and computational law at Stanford, so very passionate about this topic, definitely a big nerd. So if you have deeper questions, feel free to ask them. I think it's going to be really exciting to have this session with you all to really give you a sense of what AI and GPT can and cannot do and how it works. So our hope for this session is to have it be really collaborative and to give you a really good sense of how you can use it in your practice and how you can collaborate with it.
And that means that we're going to have to all participate, okay? There are participation marks. It's just love and attention from us, that's all. But you are in a really great position to have the chance to ask questions, but also to bring your own experience. We want to hear from you. What's it been like trying to navigate this time of change? And where are you finding challenges and where are you finding successes? So today we are going to, look, we already did that. Take care of some introductions. We're going to level set on what is AI actually good at? Because it's very easy to just start thinking that we'll just solve everything with AI. Has anybody had that kind of reaction either when you're speaking to somebody else or that's been kind of what you're reading in your news feed? Maybe? Like, oh, just AI it? Yeah, absolutely. There we go. Then we're getting into some practical steps. We'll talk you through how it might look for you and your firm to bring an AI tool online, and we're going to test it out.
Great. So here's your interactive chance number 1, okay? Which is a show of hands. Have you ever felt like you need to jump in and get some AI? Yeah?
Yeah.
Wow, a lot of you. Okay, anybody want to share out? Like, was it you, like, finding it on the news? Like, what's the experience been? I'm curious. You can also just shout it out.
Yeah, you just shout.
This is, like, pretty casual.
We're chill here. Who's had a boss say they have...
Oh, yeah, back there.
Can I ask a really stupid question?
Absolutely.
When you say AI, what do you mean?
Well, that's exactly the point here, right? It's like get some AI is the exact vagueness that I think we're trying to get to the bottom of. Most people right now, when they say AI, are probably talking about large language models and some natural language search. But we can get into all of the nitty-gritty different parts of AI. So if you have questions about that, please do bring them, because I think that's where the fun and the nuance comes in, right? But I think the point of this question is like a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? Like get some AI is like very vague.
And just so we're clear, AI, artificial intelligence. If anyone's here for a different acronym, then you might be disappointed by what we're talking about.
That's true.
So let's lay a little bit of foundation. So what is AI actually good at? And for the purposes of this section, I'm talking about generative AI. So these are tools like ChatGPT, Midjourney, the ones that have really set the world on fire a little bit when it comes to access to AI-backed models. And I have my friend Edna up to help us remember an acronym. So if you don't know the reference to Edna, maybe lean next to your neighbor and find someone who has the Disney Channel. You would be able to pick it up. But multiple Ednas because the acronym is plural. MODES. So what AI is fantastic at is manipulating, optimizing, drafting, explaining, and summarizing. Let's go through them really quickly. Manipulating. So we're going to take something that you've written, make it shorter, make it more detailed, or written in a completely different tone or language. Reorganize text into a table, a set of questions, or alphabetically, And I know you can all think of an example where you've had to do some of that work, right? Just reorganizing, reformatting. Change an image, because this is not limited only to text. Change an image from the summer farm to be in the winter. Take an existing logo and change the colors. Optimizing. Have the AI optimize your website for SEO. Anyone tried this yet? No? Okay, now you've got a fun thing to try. You can optimize your content to speak to a particular audience. Say you work in immigration law. Optimize the language you're using in your emails to be more easily understood by someone who is not a native English speaker. If your clients typically come to you in a moment of crisis, they're looking for help, infuse your existing website forms with more empathetic language for a smoother client experience. Drafting. Generate a speech, website copy, blog post, LinkedIn post. Anyone else feel like LinkedIn is a full-time job? No? Just me. Great. That's going to be a super helpful way. What it's really impressive at is getting you from blank page to first draft. Although I cannot more emphatically recommend you need to do a thorough edit. Explaining. If you're learning about something new, have AI explain something to you as if you were a beginner. Think of it like a coach. The back and forth nature of chat is uniquely positioned to allow you to dig into particular topics and nuances so that it's tailoring the learning to you. And finally, summarizing. Take a long-form article and create summaries. Okay, does anybody work with long-form documents? Y'all are asleep.
Yeah, you all work with long-form.
You all have long-form documents and creating summaries. Ask for the potential actions one might take based on that report. So for example, you've got a really long article on law.com, but you want to know, just give me the salient points. Good Lord, just give me a summary. Find out who would be most interested in a topic based on an article. Who might you want to send it to? Discover what a product or service does by asking for the key strengths and weaknesses based on their website. If you have a transcript from a webinar or a meeting, you can have that summarized and have an AI solution offer you what the key action items might be for you to take next.
Yeah, and even in the summarization, I think a lot of it is about prompt engineering, right? So really being able to talk to it and to give it detailed instructions. And here's maybe a hot take, which is that most computers, including, AI programs, are pretty dumb. So you need to be really specific when you give instructions, right? You can't just say, pick up the cup. You need to be like, your hand needs to be placed at this specific angle, and you need to apply a very specific amount of force to then be able to grasp the object and try to lift it up by the specific number of inches. Like, that's sort of how you have to talk to it. So prompt engineering is sort of how you communicate with large language models, and it's something we're going to experiment with. But getting good at talking to it actually is going to be a superpower for you in your practice, I posit. An important sort of risk factor that we hear a lot of concern around from law firms specifically is around data being used, proprietary data specifically, to sort of train more models, right? So the way generative models work is that they've seen a lot of content, a lot of data, and then based on that data, they can generatively predict the most likely next term. It's actually kind of amazing that it works, if you think about it from that, statistical probabilistic perspective. So whenever you have information that you don't want to be used to train these models, you have the opportunity on the generally available ChatGPT platform to set your settings to private, which means you don't enable the chat history, but that means that data is not used to train any subsequent models. So that's something you can do. Another thing you can do to make sure that your data is not used to train subsequent models is to actually use APIs or use platforms that have an API that is enterprise grade, because that means that data does not get used to then train the models. So it's important if you have proprietary information, just so that there isn't any accidental leak. Supervision is really, really important, right? So as with the internet, some people are really good at using it. Some people are good at using it in a way that sort of leads to not so great information sometimes, right? So understanding the limitations will allow you to really effectively use AI tools and natural language tools to sort of help you up-level your practice. But that also means that you have to supervise the content generation, right? Like the AI, like large language models don't have self-reflective capabilities. They can't reason in the way that you reason or that your paralegals can reason. So you always have to, even if it's very eloquent, this is actually where it gets tricky, right? ChatGPT is very eloquent and can very confidently, very eloquently tell you something that's absolutely false. And I'm sure you've all experienced that. And that's because it's generatively generating text, right? It's not actually reasoning necessarily about that text in the way that humans can. So you need to be careful reviewing all of the content and supervising anybody in your practice, or also educating them about how the models actually work, right? Because once you understand how they work, you're also not so surprised that they're hallucinating. They're hallucinating because they're generatively giving you the next probable term. They're not actually understanding language in the same way that humans do. So make sure that your team understands the limitations and has some supervision, and that you have review processes internally. And especially make sure that when you work with clients, that you only use it for drafting of statements that don't actually require specific legal knowledge. Again, another good example in immigration law might be, I want to tell my story about that one time I was getting an award for my extraordinary ability visa. I can tell that story without specific legal knowledge, so ChatGPT might be a really good tool for that specific use case. But if there's any sort of legal framing or legal knowledge required, I would actually recommend that you do the drafting on your end, or at least have really tight supervision. Large language models are also surprisingly good at translation. So that's another thing that you can leverage, again, with caution and review. So especially when it matters, you might want to make sure that the first draft can be generated by ChatGPT or by like an AI tool. Google Translate is another one that's not even an AI tool, but that's been around. That's very similar. It like uses a lot of training data to sort of learn how to translate text. Just make sure that it gets reviewed by somebody who's fluent in the language, who can look at the original text and the other text, or get certified by a translator in court proceedings. That, like, we want to make sure we keep people safe and we don't put people in precarious situations. So leverage it, but also know how to collaborate with it and understand its limitations.
I'm curious, before we move on, how many folks in the room have actually used ChatGPT? Okay. Not 100%, but most. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, and what was that experience like for you? What were your first impressions? Love it.
I asked it a legal question and got it wrong.
Yeah.
You got a wrong answer.
Not surprising, right? Like, it just like, it's like, this sounds like it might be the right answer. And that's how it's...
It sounded good.
Yeah, exactly. It's very eloquent.
As the confidence of a teenager.
Yes.
Anyone else? Lights are bright, so we got to give big hands. Okay, one more. Yeah.
We use it to summarize and think of deposition or generic deposition or discovery questions. It usually comes up with about 90% of everything we thought of, but then it comes up with either a different phrasing or a different perspective that we hadn't.
Yeah.
So we treat it like a legal assistant that doesn't have privilege. So we redact personal information, and then it's a really handy supplement for our team.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to repeat, what they're able to use it to generate deposition questions, you said? Sorry. Yeah, perfect. And about 90% of what it generates, we already thought of that, but that extra 10% didn't think of that. That's what I find too when I'm using it. It's like, all right, well, most of this is stuff like I could have taken the time to do. Yeah. I didn't have to because it generated it for me. But there's usually one or two nuggets in there where you're like, ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and I love the collaboration that you highlighted, right? You like put some guardrails around it. You say, this is how we treat it. This is how we work with it. And then this is how we review it. And I think that's kind of the core of where we're trying to get here with this session, is to encourage you to experiment with these tools, but also understand the limitations. So in terms of practical next steps, what that means is you need to have human review steps, especially when it matters. You might want to have 2 or 3 and actually make sure it gets reviewed by somebody who really has domain expertise and has the ability to fact check the content. And I actually think that lawyers have that as a superpower, right? Like, you have so much context-specific, nuanced knowledge that you can very easily do human review and sort of like treat it as your, teenager who is very eloquent and very good with words, but may not understand the law. It's also, I think, important to have a conversation internally at your firms around ethics for the use of AI, right? Where do we use it? Where do we not use it? What are the settings? How do we make sure we have review steps? How do we assess vendors? We'll get into the nitty-gritty details of that as well. But actually having a conversation with your team about it, I think, opens doors, right? And I think a lot of things that I see from folks I talk to is that there's either a ban or it's kind of blanket encouraged. And I think either is a bit challenging, right? When you blanket ban it, people are still going to use it, and you might not have the right tools to make sure that your clients stay safe and that your work stays ethical and sound. On the other hand, if you just give blanket permission without the nuance required to actually understand the limitations, then you might also be in trouble. So I would actually really, really encourage you to have a conversation and just talk about it openly. How can we do this as a firm? How can we leverage it, and where are the potential risks?
And if you create safety around that, you're going to get much more productive discussions out of it as well. If they're safe to say that, hey, I tried this and it didn't work, your firm is also going to learn a lot more quickly.
Yeah. And I think you'll also see innovation, right? People might stay up to date with new things like embeddings or other sort of tooling in the OpenAI and like other companies' ecosystem that will help you stay ahead of the curve with your firm. In terms of mitigation of risks, I think we'll get into some of those as well, and like later down the road. But I think there's like generally two buckets, right? One is not understanding the limitations of what it can do and not understanding the generative nature. So taking what GPT says as fact without sort of that critical thinking lens that allows you to say, okay, that's an interesting draft with some interesting ideas that are sometimes a little bit rogue, right? Or false, as you were saying. So let's review it. And then I think the other risk category, actually, maybe there's three. The other risk categories around like data privacy and keeping your data safe and understanding privacy mode. So not leaking any confidential information accidentally. And then the last thing is, I think, actually the most challenging that people don't think about as much, which is the bias in our, like, inevitably embedded in every single model, right? So understanding that the large data set that it was trained on reflects certain points of view, so that you can actually understand what the limitations are there as well and have judicious interactions with the tool. And there's some ways to sort of score risks, and we'll go through that in great detail later. So I'm not going to do that without a visual with you, but we'll get there as well.
Okay, it's time to talk to your neighbors. What's the most challenging aspect of bringing AI into your law firm? Spend just a few minutes, somebody near you, and have the quick discussion.
Well, if you feed it a PDF, yes. So we just got a question. But we have to share out as well. So there are ways to leverage the API, which is the way that most companies embed AI tooling into their stack, right? You can use that at the enterprise grade level, which means that the enterprise grade data never gets shared, right? If you run it through an API instead of doing it through the chat interface, you actually have that privacy preserving setting on. So that's kind of interesting, right? So if you use the API, or if you work with partners that use the API, again, double check with them, make sure that they understand the privacy settings, but the API is SOC 2 compliant and also doesn't share or use the data for training. So you can actually safely use it in those contexts, but don't just feed it into the general model. So ChatGPT is sort of an interface that is publicly available that you can just, talk to. But if you actually have products that use the API, you can give it sensitive information without having to worry about that. The risks that come with that are the same risks that come with any sort of cyber risk questions. So if you have questions about that, happy to chat about it. But it's more than about how is data stored and safeguarded, more than the actual risk of using it for training models, which is what most people are worried about when they think about AI tools.
Fantastic. So any brave folk want to share? We've got our mic runner at the back, and I'm going to be very nice because she gets mad at me when I don't wait for the mic. Throw a hand up if you could, or else I will pick on you.
I'll give you the law firms who want to share free workshop on AI with your law firm.
The stakes are down.
We'll have the conversation.
There you go. Great, over here.
A lot of it is adoption and getting people to just sort of be comfortable with it. And if you put in a prompt and you don't get something that you're looking for right away, to understand that that's an iterative process rather than it didn't give me what I want, so this isn't a useful tool for me.
Got it. So adoption, just to repeat what you said, adoption is a challenge. And if you have somebody who is playing with the tool and doesn't get what they want on the first thing, they're like, forget this.
Yeah. I love that. Great observation. Yes?
That question rose up out of our conversation, and it's directly related to what I was talking about, which is
like one of the problems that we're having
about jumping in and playing is feeling safe. You know, vetting, trusting. Like I'm a family attorney. If I have a bunch of discovery, if I've got some guy's 10 years of bank statements,
100%.
and I want to like analyze it, I want to feed it in, analyze it, see how much he's spending on stuff, seeing if there's any weird purchases that we can suss out. Take my paralegal all day. Takes this machine 5 minutes, but now someone's bank information is in this machine.
Absolutely.
And I don't know this machine. And like,
Don't trust the machine.
There are products and there are APIs, but they're all young. It's not like it's not a trusted brand yet. And so that's a barrier. And there's a lot that goes into figuring out that, because the basic cybersecurity stuff, we have known players in other fields.
Yeah.
But here we're still very worried.
You trust Clio with those documents? Yes. Okay. And I know, I'm here to plug, but that it really just speaks to like, you do have to know and trust the partners that you're going to work with, right? So finding those partners that understand the nuances of legal and understand the risks that are at play, those are the ones that you're going to do your due diligence on to create that sense of trust.
Yeah. And like do the due diligence on the younger startups, for instance, right? I think what you're going to discover is that a lot of younger startups actually use legacy infrastructure with cloud providers like Google and like Amazon Web Services, which, by the way, hosting it on there is a much better idea than trying to host it as a tiny startup, right? Like your like surface attack is much, much bigger if you're a small company like that. But hopefully that gives you some trust as well, right? Like most companies that are startups in the space don't actually use their own hosting infrastructure. They rely on large trusted brands to actually host that data and keep it safe with the large security teams that come with Google's security team, for instance.
Anyone else? Is anyone struggling to get buy-in from others? Yeah. Maybe? Yes, okay. We'll talk about that. All right, over here.
I guess one of the more challenging, since everything's new, is knowing what product does what I need and what all the products do.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so many of them right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. Anyone else? We'll do maybe one more. No? Oh, here, friend. Thank you. Oh, hold on one sec. She's right behind you. Thank you.
I would say trust.
Trust,
I mean, if
yeah.
you're feeding information into it, and let's say you get it to the point where it's analyzing discovery, you're feeding data into it, and it's deciding what responses to give. If it's hallucinating, then can you really trust what you're getting back?
Right. So the trust on the other side as well. So trust in securing, keeping that information confidential and secure, but also trust in the output.
Yeah.
Right.
An interesting thing you might want to explore if you're interested in sort of like knowledge in more of a box, right? Embeddings are sort of another technology that is in the OpenAI framework. And the idea there is that you sort of have a library of resources. It's like you go to a library, there's a bunch of books, you can decide which books are in the library. And like the model is the librarian that like, sometimes gets things wrong, but you can actually ask it to like pull a book for you from the bookshelf. So embeddings are actually another interesting tool that I would recommend exploring and playing with, or like softwares that use embeddings. Yeah, embeddings are basically that technology, right? You can say like, look through these documents that I've given you to find something relevant. So it's basically a bigger context window for the chat interface. So you might have encountered that when you summarize, right? You say like, summarize this thing, that it'll look at the context window, which is what you give it, right? Like summarize this text, and then it'll take its generative sort of output from that text that you give it and generate the summary from that. So embeddings do that at a larger scale, where you can sort of give it a whole library of things. So you could say like, take all of my documents and find me like the last time I did a whatever contract with a company of X size, and it can, if it's well set up, it can find it. So there's also natural language search that you can explore. But we don't want to get too off track here with all the different AI technologies. But if you have questions, like raise them. Okay, so let's like try it out. We're actually going to send you all, we made a little handout for you all, which is a practical guide for evaluating. It'll walk you through sort of the assessment that Erin and I will walk you through live as well. So this is actually something you can bring back to your team. So our goal here is to evaluate you with some tools to have those conversations, to evaluate those vendors, right? To sort of like ask the right questions. Because I think what I hear a lot is like, this is new territory. We don't really know what we don't know. We don't really know what questions to ask. And hopefully that will make you feel like you do have that toolkit and those questions readily available for you.
And just so that PDF is available in the conference app right now.
Yes.
It's connected to this session. So
That's right.
Okay, so let's start with our objectives and requirements identification stage. You need to understand what your firm actually needs. And it can be very easy to get into a tool or get into a tool evaluation and follow the shiny, right? It's like, okay, well, I set out to have it, synthesize documents, but when look at that, it does contract. Oh, that's really cool. Like, what about over? All right, that's pretty neat. I get it. Like, that's pretty much 80% of my day right now. But be specific, and be specific before you start looking. So documenting what your firm's specific requirements are, and then write down what the goals are. So what do you actually want to achieve with it? Are you increasing efficiency, cost savings? Are you expanding more services? If you spend a little bit of time to get really specific about what you want to achieve, you'll be able to go back and say, did we achieve it? Did we actually do what we set out to do? And that'll be really helpful information as a feedback loop.
On the technical evaluation, I also want to give a preface here, which is that any vendor or any like solutions provider should be able to, in simple terms, explain to you how their technology works, right? Maybe not in itty-bitty gritty details, right? Like it doesn't have to be that detailed, but at a baseline level, they should be able to explain what it does to you. So going through features and functions, right? Does it have the features that align with the firm's needs? Back to Erin's point, can the tool be customized and fine-tuned to suit the specialty of a specific use case? So can we get some embeddings on our own documents? Can we fine-tune it on our own documents? Can we make sure we get higher accuracy rate and higher sort of scores in terms of like how good it is at pulling that information that's specific to you? Does it have integration with like existing systems? Can it easily fit into your stack? And then also scalability, right? Can it actually handle the firm's current volume as the firm scales and grows? So I think that actually goes both ways. Like, can we use this tool to scale is another question that you might want to ask. So how much can it handle? How many clients can it handle is like a good question to ask.
Data training and evaluation. So we touched on this a little bit, and I know it's a question that gets asked often. So asking where that data is actually coming from. How is the tool learning? How is the tool continuing to be upgraded and refined and specialized? We talked a little bit about the idea of bias, right? When you're training on these mass data sets that already have inherent bias, how is the tool thinking about that? And how are the creators of the tool, rather, not the tool, thinking about that and making sure that they are adjusting for it? Where is the AI foundational data source from? Is it reliable and is it relevant to legal? Again, we're going to have I think the approach I really like to take is like the right tool for the right job, right? So there are going to be instances within your workflows that it's perfectly fine to use a non-legal specific tool, right? If you want to have it generate email so that you don't have to say happy birthday to your aunt, great use of ChatGPT. But if you want to do something legal specific, you're going to want to have tools that are tuned to it. And how are they learning and how is it adapting and how is that data that you were putting in being used?
And if it like uses a public model like Claude or GPT-4, you can usually get information on the most recent sort of like data scoop. So I think one other misconception I'm going to clear up is that like for the most part, like the models themselves don't have access to the live internet, right? So if something happened yesterday, it won't know, right? So the context window, like the data was trained on is actually, I think like a year back currently, but you can find out from when the data is sort of like accurate and trained on. So that's another thing that you can ask.
You may actually see that in responses sometimes, where if you ask something, especially I've seen a ChatGPT do this, where it'll pop back and be like, my data set only goes to January 2022, so I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. Great. And then from an ethical and compliance evaluation, I already heard some good questions there, but some things to ask is just like, does the AI tool adhere to regulations concerning data protection and client confidentiality, right? Like how are they handling data? Are they SOC 2 compliant? Do they have knowledgeable people that understand data privacy and security? Bias and fairness, like does it address it or how does it mitigate it? I'm going to tell you right now that's a much trickier question to ask vendors, partially because they're all built based on existing models. So the answer will actually likely come from the source model. So it'll come from like, Bard or Claude or like GPT-4, the documentation that exists there. But the documentation exists, so you can actually look it up. So you can ask the vendors like which models they use. And then accountability, right? Is there a clear understanding of how the AI tool makes decisions? And is there a mechanism for accountability? So one thing that we sort of do at Formally is always making sure that when we give something that is an AI output, we sort of have a human review step and we're like, this is where we pulled it, right? Like this is where it comes from. So that's one example of like a practice where you can sort of like see, what did you do? Like show it to me. What we're not talking about here is explainability in AI, which is a whole technical field that we're not going to get into, but like at a high level, can it sort of like show you the work that it did?
Yeah. Has anybody played with some of the tools? And unfortunately, the name is escaping me, but the tools that will actually do step-by-step. Hyperwrite is one of them, where you can see on the right-hand bar as it's performing a task, it'll be like, here's the step I took, here's the step I took, here's the step I took. No? Maybe? Okay. Hyperwrite is a good one to trust, or to test rather, not trust. But yeah, so there's different levels and different models, different tools are offering different levels of transparency kind of out of the box. Okay, time to talk again. Which of the evaluation stages we've talked about so far feels the most challenging? So technical, data and training, ethical, and compliance. Speak with the neighbors.
All right, should we bring it back? Share out a little bit.
All right, everybody. Oh, that works well. Thank you.
I love it. This is great. There's a lot to talk about. Now I'm excited for you all to bring it back to your firms and have those conversations. But anything folks wanted to share out? Particular questions that seem challenging? Or phases of the evaluation process?
Who voted for technical? Hands up? No? Data? Yeah, a couple?
Yeah.
How about ethical? Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty good split.
That's great. Awesome. Going to get through these so that we have some time to play and also some time to ask questions. But this one's, I think, relatively more straightforward, which is really financial evaluation. The goal here is to sort of understand, like, how does this model charge? A question you might want to ask is, does it charge per token? A token is about 4 letters in most cases. So how does it charge? What is the AI like the usage-based fee structure like? Do we charge per seat? Is there specific beta pricing? Is it going to increase? So I think you actually already know how to ask these questions, but do take that into consideration. You don't know how to ask those questions? I hear laughter. Why are you laughing? Oh. Okay. So a token is sort of a unit that AI models use as a measure of like how much they're processing, right? So a token is like a unit of processing.
It's like if you have a freelance writer and they're charging you per word that they write.
That's a great way to put it. Thank you. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And then, yeah, I'll just move on.
Yeah,
But if you have questions about the financial evaluation and about tokens, do raise them.
What you'll start to notice too about like some of our slides here is they should feel familiar. You've probably evaluated vendors before, just not in the AI space, right? So some of these are going to be more common sense, might be processes you already have in place. And then there's just like slight refinement and new language around AI tools. So when it comes to vendor evaluation, again, what does their support look like? Are they going to leave you high and dry? Are they going to answer your questions? Do they have documentation and training or videos, things you could follow along? How are they communicating with you? Do you have a dedicated rep, or are you put into kind of a chatbot queue to be answered? And what is their future development plans? Now, you may not go as deeply on some of these questions, specifically the future development plans. If it's a tool, you just want to kind of get in and test, and there's low risk or low commitment for you. But a lot of these sorts do have sort of a roadmap or a plan, and they're actually being quite communicative, a lot of them, with their current clients to say, or current customers to say, hey, like, we've got these 4 features and they're coming soon. We've heard you and this is happening. What's really exciting is that if you are working with one of these startups, I've had the chance to kind of direct their product roadmap. Yeah, just by providing some feedback. They're so eager to hear from the folks that are using their tools.
Yeah, I can confirm that. Like, really excited. Like, we'll send you flowers, but like, yeah, truly startups, I think, are really excited to work with law firms to like address real pain points. And a good practice is to share out, like, this is when we'll build it. Like, we don't have it right now, but you can expect it in 3 weeks, or you can expect it in 2 months. So startups are kind of fun because you sometimes get things really quickly.
Exactly. Some of them are coming into me and it's like, hey, we'll have that Friday. I'm like,
Yeah.
Friday.
Oh, truly. This one's just a tool, so we don't have to do this right now, but this is something you can do as part of sort of the internal conversation. If there's a tool that you're particularly interested in, you can do a good old SWOT analysis using the questions that we just walked you through to sort of understand the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and potential threats to your firm to give you sort of a clearer picture. Pro tip, you can actually use ChatGPT to pre-draft your SWOT analysis. So you can actually tell it, like, do a SWOT analysis based on my notes, and it's actually quite good at structuring unstructured data. So if you're a note taker like me, like, sometimes the sentences are complete, sometimes they're not, it still picks it up pretty well. So you can actually play with the tools to help you do your SWOT analysis too. Or you can do it on paper if you want to do the old-fashioned way.
So we're kind of at the end of the presentation segment. So we've protected some time here. And Anna, did you want to try some prompt engineering with the
Yeah. Are people interested? Do people have laptops? Are people interested in trying some prompt engineering?
Prompt engineering, what?
Prompt engineering is how to talk to the model, right? How to get it to do things for you. So we can go through that. I can show you how to turn on privacy mode on ChatGPT. This is kind of...
I would like to see how to turn on the privacy mode.
Privacy, yeah.
Great. I feel like I don't have a computer to show it with, but we can just walk through it from my memory. Do people have their laptops out?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So there is a settings tab
once you go to chat
on the bottom left on ChatGPT.
It's a great memory exercise.
And then I think there is one that says training and data. Data controls, there you go. And then you can toggle off.
Hey, laptop is...
Hey, laptop. Wow, this is good.
Oh, you're wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, amazing. Now we can do some prompt engineering. It's going to be fun.
Who's ready to live demo?
Honestly, this is really fun. Prompt engineering is the good stuff. I'm going to tell you. There's whole jobs for this now.
Absolutely.
Also, you get to call yourself a prompt engineer. I think that's kind of cool. You don't think that's kind of cool? I did prompt engineering at my firm.
I'm also using it on my phone.
That's okay. Were you able to find the settings on your phone?
So yeah, settings and beta, data controls, chat history and training, turn that off. Yeah, so let's do it again. We go to the little hamburger down here. We go to settings and beta. There's some beta features too, which is kind of fun. You can use plugins and you can use some data analysis tools. You can actually give it images now too.
Mm-hmm. You have it? I don't have it yet.
Oh, I have it. Yeah.
Of course you do.
I use it all the time. It's very fun. So you can actually give it we just used it for Post-its. We did a brainstorming session and it can just read all the text on the Post-its and summarize it for you.
Amazing.
So yeah, you turn that off, that little toggle.
You got a mic behind you. Hold on one sec, okay?
Can you talk about how to use the plugins or what the useful plugins would be, I guess?
Oh my goodness, that would be a very long list. So plugins, just so that we're all clear. So when you're using using GPT-4, I was going to maybe show us there. There's a drop down and it will let you pick a couple of different modes. So plugins are basically the connection points other companies have built to do specific tasks. So for example, Trip Planner has a plugin here. So if you go into GPT-4 and say, plan my trip to Austin, Texas next year in October, right? Yes. Then I'm traveling with my family. Here's what I want to do. Then you can actually book it directly with Trip Planner.
Yeah. By asking ChatGPT. How do you? What kind of firm do you have?
Estate planning, tax,
estate planning tax.
I am particularly, and you can talk to it like a person. Particularly, oh my God, I can't type on.
While she's refining that, the other one that always blows my mind that is non-legal specific, Instacart has a plugin. So you can ask GPT-4, plan my meals for the next week. Give me the recipes, make an ingredient list, and then have my groceries delivered. I know, right?
It's pretty great. Make your suggestions short, and then give me a SWOT analysis. Okay, here's some use cases for your estate planning firm.
Can we read it okay on screen? I know it's...
Yeah, there's some document automation, automate the review process.
There we go. Thank you.
Some SWOT analysis. There you go.
Hey.
Efficiency streamlines the estate planning process, reduces manual paperwork, convenience, weaknesses, dependency, learning curve, compatibility issues. Cool. What type of use cases are people most interested in? Sorry, I was just playing because the plugin question was asked, but in terms of prompt engineering, any particular things you're interested in like trying out or playing with?
Any tasks that you want it to do, essentially.
Yeah.
And we'll help you craft the prompt. Maybe something you tried and you got a bad answer. Yeah, down here. A summary of a deposition transcript. And page line summary, sorry. Page line summary of a deposition transcript.
Well, you can actually upload a transcript with images if you would like to, but we're just going to try to find a PDF here.
Mm-hmm.
How do you upload the transcript?
Well, we turned off the training, right? We turned off the training data. So what we just did is we turned on the privacy mode. It's just not called privacy mode, but it's the reason that there can be privacy leaks is because the data from the document is used to train subsequent models, right? So there might be an accidental leak. It's actually kind of unlikely, but there might be an accidental leak of private information if you don't turn off the training functionality, right? Or if you don't use an API. So the way the models work is that they ingest a lot of information, and then they sort of like have all this input, they try to make sense of it, and then they predictively generate the likely next word, the most likely next word. So it's generatively creating text and writing texts. And the reason you can't often ask it like, well, why did you say that? Is because it often gives it gives answers generatively back to you, right? It's like talking to a really eloquent debater who like doesn't have any subject matter expertise. Like it'll say something that sounds good, but it doesn't actually mean that it's fact-based unless you use the techniques that we were talking about around like embeddings, et cetera.
Use ChatGPT for something private by turning off the data?
Mm-hmm. Well, it still depends on.
Yeah, hold on.
Let me nuance this for you. If you're generally comfortable with SOC 2 compliant organizations that like handle data in a SOC 2 compliant way, which is the sort of like security framework, and you turn off training data, then the risk is very much like working with another platform that handles sensitive information, but it's not going to be used for training, which is the thing that most people are actually concerned about, and that's why people raise these questions usually.
It's kind of the nuance between working with like an LPM that is sanctioned by your bar and one that is not, right? So it's like nobody's given this final seal of approval at sort of the ABA level or like the ethics opinions level that says, yes, ChatGPT in privacy mode is fine. However, when you are in privacy mode, your risk is extremely diminished.
Because the core new, like the net new risk that we're running into here, this may have been a little bit too long. This is like 75 pages long. Yeah. So, fun. APIs can also handle larger context windows. So that's another use case for embeddings, right? If you want to put in these like really long depositions, you can use embeddings or you can use APIs that have larger context windows. Context window is basically the capability of the model to take specific context that you like put in this little command line down here to, I think we need to have a new tab maybe. It's like struggling here. But that's sort of called the context window. So the context window is your side of the chat.
Hi, just a quick question. Would you be able to, because the deposition is online, would you be able to just use the URL as a reference? So you can type in summarize this link, and then you put the direct link. You have to include the HTTPS for it to actually capture that, and then it will actually begin to search that. Is that something?
This is a like PDF link, so I don't know, but we'll try it.
Try.
I'm guessing it won't be able to read it.
Yeah. Okay.
It can't currently do that.
However, there are other tools that can.
Yeah.
Yes. Bing Chat can. If you drop it in there, Bing Chat can actually just like hang out on your sidebar. And if you're using Edge, you have to use Microsoft Edge, which is their browser. And then you can hit basically a magic button that says like summarize what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. So summarizing is one use case that we're looking at. Are there any other use cases that we feel strongly about that you've tried to do that you wish it could do?
We can try the image feature.
Oh yeah, because I haven't seen it. They're rolling out image and voice to GPT-4, but they're rolling it out. So even though I'm a premium user, I haven't gotten to see it yet. I think it's because I'm Canadian. I think they're biased against me. Voice is another really powerful tool, right? It's basically the addition of the way you interact with Siri or Alexa, but with the GPT-4 models.
This is kind of cool. It was like, hey, this appears to be a court notice. You were right? Like, I can't read everything, but this is what I got. Kind of cool.
I've also used, there's another mode in GPT-4.
Yeah, it's very low quality.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh, it's real small. There's a model in GPT-4 called, what's it called? Data visualization, the one that works with Python. And so you can do things like give it a set of information and say, make a chart for me. Make 10 data visualizations for this for me. So if you're making presentations or if you're doing reports that require that sort of visual presentation of data, it's really, really helpful. And my favorite command line that I've given it so far is I gave it a table and I said, hey, I want to see this in data visualization. So it made a chart for me. And I said, can you make it prettier? And it did. It can also give you insights based on that data, right? So if you're feeding it data in, say like, what's the most relevant thing here? What's the outliers here? What's interesting about this data?
So here we're asking it to, I'm asking it to write I don't know why it's all caps, but generate a social media post about our ClearCon talk about generative AI for law firms. Make sure to use a lot of emojis and to give the speaker, Aaron, a major shout out. Exciting times ahead!
Emojis!
Wow, it's a lot of emojis.
It's not being shy about that. Aaron rocks. Hey, great hashtag. I love that.
Aaron rocks. Now, write it for LinkedIn. I'm actually going to keep the old caps because it's easier to read. For LinkedIn.
So one thing that's interesting to point out here is the way that Annalie's refining this. She doesn't re-ask, right? It does not also generate a social media post about this for LinkedIn. It's keeping the contextual information from your previous prompt. So that is really helpful. It can also lead to some bizarre responses. So if you're switching, tasks, switching conversations, you want to be clearing this and starting a new chat just to avoid introducing any of that unintended context from above.
Make it longer and make sure to use a lawyerly tone. Let's see what it says here. But I'm trying to show you some capabilities of prompt engineering, right? Which is you can actually talk to it like an assistant a little bit, right? Like you don't have to do anything fancy with how you talk to it, but you can sort of ask it for specific things like tone. You can ask it for emojis. You can, ask it to generate a table. Yeah, we're pleased.
We went real formal on this. Ask it to make it less formal, because that's one I use a lot too, is tone shifting. So if it does get...
Our distinguished speaker, Aaron.
Distinguished is a stretch.
We'll be at the forefront, elucidating the nuances of how AI is not just a technological advance. Do you all feel seen or not so much?
1,000%. This is exactly how you talk, right? But that tone switching is really helpful because it will often like give you something that's sort of 80% there, right? It's like, well, that's a little more formal than I need, or it's a little more casual than I want. So making those adjustments is really helpful. And while Ollie is demonstrating the fact that you don't have to do a lot of like fancy things, you can be very casual and concise in the way that you're asking it to do things. Some of the most powerful prompts will put a role in place. So if you're saying, pretend you're an SEO expert and then do this. Yeah. Pretend you're a marketing expert and then do this. Pretend you're a sports psychology coach, a therapist, although I think there's better services for therapy. But putting it into a role helps the model to contextualize what you're after.
You can even do code. So here I'm saying, turn it into a blog post for my website in JavaScript.
I use the code function to create a video game where you're a lawyer and you have to jump over the filing cabinets, like a little side scroller. And I never touched a piece of code.
Yeah. There you go. Yes, we can do all these things.
You have the power in your hands.
Now create a table with the 10 most important takeaways. But do you see how it can like really help you with marketing? It can really help you with copy. It can help you with like a lot of tasks. It can also take really unstructured data. That's the thing I was mentioning earlier, and like turn it into a more structured format.
We have a question in the back.
Yes. When you were going, first of all, thank you so much for this great presentation.
You're welcome.
Second of all, when you were going through your screen with the financial valuations, how do you think AI will be priced? Do you think it will be by token, by seat? Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas on that?
You want to take first crack at that?
Yes. I think most AI-based solutions are going to be a mix of like subscription plus usage fee to some extent, right? So I think the question to ask is like, how do you charge per token, right? Or like, do you charge per token? If so, what does that look like? Do you charge per document? If so, what does that look like? So if there is a usage-based fee, I would just ask those questions to better understand it, and also make sure that the way they use token is actually the same way like OpenAI defines tokens, right? So that you don't create any misunderstandings. So just ask them to define for you what that means in sort of like normal terms, like Erin was summarizing, like, oh, this means it's like when a writer charges you per word, right? Like try to understand. And then you can ask like, how much do your current customers typically pay for that on a monthly basis? Something that's kind of cool about that is like it tends to be still very low. So if you paid a human to do it, it would be much more expensive likely. But I would still sort of like get a sense and feel for that so that you can understand what to expect.
A lot of the tools that I've been trialing, they're almost structured like your phone plan, right? So it's a per seat, as in per device, but then usage based on like, okay, am I on unlimited data? Am I on 2 gigs? Like where am I spending the money in that sense? Often you'll also see a credit system. So Dolly, which is the image side of OpenAI, will do a credit. So you spend credits to generate images, and then you buy more credits when you run.
It's not per se all that different. It just means that you sort of have to like develop a sense of awareness of like what that means in the specific notice of like specific context of that, like specific app. I think like a big takeaway here is like you already know how to ask most of these questions, right? Like you already have evaluated new technologies in the past. You've evaluated case management systems. You've evaluated all sorts of other systems. Like you already know what you need to know. So I would not be scared of this technology just because it has a lot of buzziness around it, right? And thank you also for forcing me to explain jargon, right? Like you should totally ask people to explain jargon, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, there are no
definitely encouraged.
I have a question about ethics. So in my little group, someone raised a good point, which is that some people suggest that you disclose to clients that you're using particular AI technologies. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, especially because I wouldn't disclose to a client that I've hired a person or that I've used a software. And so what makes this different and how do people do it?
I have some opinions on that. So like, it depends what you use it for and how you communicate to your clients about it. Likely your clients, well, give them the option, right? Like we have the opportunity to help you do something with this AI tool that actually enhances your user experience in this or this way, right? So for instance, we launched Magic Docs, which is like an OCR enabled tool where you can just like dump your entire folder of documents in. We figure out what each document is and we put all the data out and we say, okay, like we found your first name on 2 documents. It was spelled differently. Which one's correct? Right? So they don't have to do manual data entry. Clients really enjoy that, right? They're like, I hate sending piles of documents to my counsel that are like poorly organized and that I have to then organize or that where I have to do data entry. So I think if you're transparent with your clients around how you use it, some of them might actually be excited about it. But if somebody, like if the tool is to sort of like draft a deposition and you want to make sure that your client has confidence that you've reviewed everything, I would actually go back to like, these are our ethics guidelines, right? Like this is how we think about it. This is where we think it makes sense. This is how we make sure that we can spend the most time with you face to face, actually serving you and doing the things that help us build the best possible case for you. So I think that's how I would communicate it to clients, is like taking some of these more paperwork-based tasks off the table means I can spend more time with you. If you're not comfortable with that, we can do it without using these tools, if that's something that you want to enable in your law firm.
You might think it'd be helpful to think about it similarly if you're using, say, like a client-facing app, right? Or if they have access via the cloud of their own documents, it's pretty much the same talk track, right? So it's like, okay, you're going to have access through Clio for Clients that lets you see your own documents, your own progress. Here's how, if they have questions about like, well, okay, is that okay that my data is in the app? Do you know what I mean? Like it's the same kind of thing around, this is how we handle the privacy. This is how we keep it secure. This is how I'm creating this is actually a moment to create a lot of confidence with your clients to say, I'm handling this. I'm also in tune with what the current technology is enabling me to do to better serve you.
A question over here.
Pick a side of the room. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. Thank you. It's very right up here.
So is there any kind of settled position on commercial use of data that's output? So example, what are the copyright implications, right? When someone asks me, it's not my area of practice, but if someone asks me, you know, I asked it to do this post and I'm using it to then market, I'll say, great, awesome, change 20% of it, at least make it yours. But is there any actual perspective on that? I haven't seen anything from ChatGPT themselves, from OpenAI, saying, you know, we own it or you own it. You could do whatever you want, free commercial license if they've adopted a Creative Commons license, et cetera. Thanks.
Yeah, you have to keep a close eye on that one. I don't think that the conversation has concluded or is fully decided. I think so far from what I understand is that it belongs to the person who generates it still, right? Like there is that sort of, but I think it's a bit of a gray area. And I think I would be a little bit careful with material that like needs to be copyrighted. But I think it would be a terrible business model for OpenAI to charge for everything that is output. So I think that the incentives don't fully align there, especially if you turn off the training. I think when people say it owns the data, I think most people still refer to the training data that you feed it. That's actually the thing that's valuable to a company like OpenAI in terms of building their models. So if you turn that off, they might like charge you extra to turn it off in the future. That's definitely a possibility. But I would actually think about it more in terms of like the IP of the model, which is used to train the next generation model, right? So owning your data would actually not, I don't think that it's around owning the outputs. I think that that's actually relatively clear cut. I think that the consensus seems to be it belongs to the person who generated it or who like created it. But I think the data ownership around like, does the stuff I put into the model belong to OpenAI? I think you need to turn on the privacy mode or the non-training data to make sure that that doesn't happen.
I think what we'll also see is that because that output, the barrier to that output is very, very low, right? So you can generate a blog post that is going to be ready in seconds to put on your website. so can every other lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? So how are you infusing it, making it yours, making it different, but also making sure that it's a representation of who you are, who your brand is something that you're going to stand behind. And I think that later on, as we kind of progress, this also may become a risk for SEO, right? If everyone's generating very similarly based content, again, how are you making yours different and making it in line with your company? All right, we are at time.
Thank you so much for all your active participation. That made it really, really fun. So thank you all.